Welcome back, everybody, to the Blues feed with the same obsession new episode. Today, we've got transfer guru Rob Pratley on the podcast to give us all the updates up to the deadline. Before we jump into that, just a reminder of the 1K subscriber giveaway. We're about 40% of the way there now, so not too far away. And one of you lucky guys could get your hands on a 25-26 shirt. So we're joined with Luke and also Rob. How are we doing, Luke?
Yeah, good, mate. Nice to see you again today.
Yeah, it's not been long. It's been a while. And Rob, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. Good to be back and good to be talking transfers. I mean, it feels like it's been a long window. I think everyone's sort of maybe just ready for it to be over.
I think most people in football themselves are ready for it over, and most fans reading briefs left, right and centre are probably fed up as well, and there'll only be more of that to come. As we were talking before, everybody likes to play some games towards the end of the transfer window. But yeah, we'll jump into it. I think obviously the first one elephant in the room, should we say, is the Xavi Simons deal. Do you want to give the guys an understanding of, from what you've heard, of what the situation was?
Sure. I mean, again, this is one of the ones where, from an optics POV, I think it looks poor on the club, but from an actual outcome POV, I don't think it's necessarily the absolute worst outcome. So, from my understanding, the club felt they had quite a broad agreement with RB Leipzig a few weeks ago for Xavi Simons, and it was all dependent on actually, seeing players leave the club, and then effectively it would get done. However, certainly there does feel to be an internal feeling from in the club that whatever terms were agreed were reneged upon. And as a result of that, and, with the difficulties, shall we say, of getting certain players out of the club, it did mean that, it was constantly being pushed and pushed back. Now, in that time, there was some residual interest from Manchester City and Bayern Munich, but I don't think it was anywhere near as, pronounced as some people suggested. It was always really a case that Simons was sort of waiting for an opportunity to leave RB Leipzig. However, I do think that Chelsea's interest in him might have waned a little bit earlier than people think. Certainly, when you speak to people, he wasn't necessarily the absolute A1 priority going into the window. The club would argue that the two of their A1 priorities were getting in their top choice cover at left back, which was Joel Harto, which they did, and also getting in the main striker target of Liam Delap, which they also did, and they tied that up fairly early. And I think now, actually, just looking at the value of how other strikers have moved in the market, Liam Delap increasingly looks like very good value when you see, moves for the likes of Nick Voltemater moving for, 90 million euros, and some of the other fees that are sort of being pushed around, Strand Larsen sort of, rejecting bids for 65 million for the player. I think increasingly that deal looks like decent business. But I do think that it sort of came to a point of push comes to shove. Chelsea finally got Christo Nkunku moving to AC Milan. And so consequently, they had to make a bit of, sort of, a judgment call, I think, on Xavi Simons. At the same time, Tottenham obviously stung by the Eze deal. They want that number 10. They lost James Maddison to the full season to the ACL injury. So consequently, they sort of had the opportunity in the gap for it. They've been looking for that sort of player. And I think as soon as Tottenham really, came into it, if they got the intention that, they were going to bid, they wanted to make sure they were going to get the player. They didn't want another Eze situation. Obviously, that themselves looked poor on them with the fact they literally had everything agreed, and then the player ended up joining Arsenal. And I think in Chelsea's case, they sort of, were happy to step back. Ultimately, I don't think they see necessary value for what Simons is at the price that's ended up being paid. There is significant salary involved in it. There have been other questions about Simons from a sort of, historically from an attitude perspective, although I do understand, a lot of that has changed nowadays. And also, at the same time, my biggest thing I think Chelsea felt is that they didn't really know where he fitted in the equation. My biggest question on Simons is what actually is his best role. I've spoken to 3 people whom I consider very good experts on it, and they've all given me very, very different answers. So I do wonder if it was a case that, Enzo Maresca has been very, very clear he wants a couple of things in this window. Versatility has been consistently mentioned, but he also wants players where it's a very defined sort of, situation of, yes, they can play X, Y, and Z roles, but their main role is A or their main role is B. And I don't think Xavi Simons has that. So I think in many ways Chelsea aren't too fussed on losing it. Obviously, due to the nature of how public the transfer it was, there's always going to be, the wailing of sort of teeth and the gnashing of fangs. But I do think from Chelsea's POV, if they wanted to get this done, they had ample opportunity to get this done. And, if they really wanted to make Simons Chelsea player, it would have happened. So there must be some sort of reason they don't want to. And for that, on that side of things, we just have to simply trust the club at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think me and Luke were discussing it earlier, and we said that basically from the player itself, I'm not that annoyed as much as I really do like the player. I can kind of understand why they didn't necessarily go for it. It's just the optics of how public it was and how Fabrizio was talking about it every 10 minutes. And then we lose it out to our bitter rivals in Tottenham. But then we didn't really bid in the end. So it's not like they hijacked us. It was not a Willian or an Eze situation. It's we just decided not to progress and he's gone there. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens next and if we sign somebody else in that position. So I think that we naturally kind of go on to the next subject of Fermin Lopez, who has kind of come out of the woodworks in the last few days. Have you heard much on that specifically?
So, what I've heard of Fermin is that he's a very well-liked player, and he was on a lot of lists this summer as potential acquisitions for a lot of clubs. The feeling is that FC Barcelona don't really want to sell, but due to their own financial situation and their own, financial skullduggery they need to do, they could be put into a situation where they have to. And Fermin Lopez's ability to play as a number 10, but also his ability to perhaps play a little bit deeper, and also the fact that he's maybe considered a bit more robust compared to some of the other, Xavi Simons or some of the other names that have been suggested, I think has possibly attracted Chelsea towards it. It very much feels a bit like one of those cases where, because Barcelona have such a defined midfield now when fully fit, it's sort of almost a bit of a sort of opportunism sort of thing. Now, when you actually talk to FC Barcelona fans, a lot of them really don't want to see Fermin Lopez go. A lot of them are concerned about Pedri's injury record and also about Gavi's injury record too. And certainly there's a view that, Fermin Lopez adds something very, very different to the team, his ability to shoot from range, his ability to sort of, break up play, but also sort of start attacks. He can really work as a fulcrum in that midfield. And there's a feeling that he really, did kick on. He's certainly someone who Hansi Flick has relied on quite a bit last season, not only as a starter, but also off the bench. And certainly, if Barcelona had their way, they don't want to sell him. However, there is ultimately the point that money does talk, and if enough money is put down, can Chelsea do something? The issue is, again, persuading the player, because he himself is a, La Masia graduate, and that thus automatically makes it a lot harder to bring them away from FC Barcelona.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think we've heard similar here that my assumption is if that's the one that they're going for and the one that they've pivoted to, he's been on the list and fairly high up for a while, and they've had some sort of encouragement that he would move. But we had heard as early as yesterday that he wasn't that interested in moving at this stage. Luke, what's your kind of thoughts on Fermin as a player? Is somebody you like?
Yeah, definitely. I've done a bit of research in him over the last sort of 48 hours since the links have been a little bit more concrete, and he sort of strikes me as a mix between an 8 and a 10. I think he'd be quite comfortable as like the advanced 8 in our system, the sort of role that Enzo Fernandez plays. But he'd also adequately cover Cole Palmer, like we're seeing at the minute. And he'll adequately cover Cole Palmer in the 10 if Palmer's pushed to the right or if Palmer's out injured. I think it could be a good deal. I think it's got to be the right fee. But overall, I'm a little concerned always when there's a player that we're linked with that's not particularly keen on coming, especially from a young player from a foreign country. You can sort of end up getting to like a homesickness point of view. Then they don't settle, then they don't play well, and it becomes a bit of an issue. So I'm optimistic if it's the one that we go for, that we've done enough research into it, and like Chelsea always do, use the data properly. But for the minute, I still think there's a surprise name around the corner. That's been my thought for the last day or two now, that I feel like there's going to be a surprise name come out of the woodwork.
Yes, obviously the secret target. as we've been recording, Fabrizio's put out about Buonanotte to Chelsea, and that's the secret target. But I believe that's probably going to be for Strasbourg. But Fabrizio's doing his master engagement mode of trying to get his clicks and all the Chelsea fans booting off. What's your guys' thoughts on Buonanotte as a whole? Luke, I'll come to you first.
Well, he's not a Chelsea player. Let's put it that way. He had a decent time on loan at Leicester last season. I think it was like nine goal involvements in 35 games or something like that in all competitions. But let's face it, Fabrizio's mixed his words as he usually does with blue coat targets, and this will be a Strasbourg signing in replacement of Enciso probably. I'm not even going to entertain the thought that it's for Chelsea, to be honest, because it would just be so fucking stupid. I'll let Rob answer it in a probably more professional and polite manner than I will.
I mean, it's so funny that this got mentioned because the other day I was having a chat with some Chelsea fans and some like general football fans, and we were debating random players in the Premier League that hadn't moved yet that we thought were going to end up going somewhere. And someone did bring up Buonanotte, and they said it just feels like the sort of player that Lyon are going to sign, doesn't it? And actually, I was all aboard the Lyon train. I said, yeah, for some reason, it does feel like the sort of player Lyon might buy. They've lost Ryan Shirky. I mean, he's a decent player. I think he has got a cap for Argentina or two couple of caps for Argentina. Like, he's not exactly bad. We're not talking about like someone that's absolutely like abysmal. And I'm looking at him thinking, God, how are you a Premier League footballer? You know, here's looking at you, the likes of Wout Faes in the last few years, who've given me hope that I could one day appear in the Premier League. But I will say, I don't quite think it's on, going from Xavi Simons and Fermin Lopez to Facundo Buonanotte would be a letdown. But I don't think we really need to worry because it's going to be a Blueco signing. I will say I think it's an excellent acquisition for Strasbourg, especially if they lose Delane Bakwa, who might still go before this window. There's a lot of interest in him from English clubs. And I actually think, compared to Enciso, he's probably slightly further ahead in his development than Enciso, albeit I think Enciso, if he absolutely hit his absolute maximum potential, would probably be better. That said, I don't necessarily think Enciso is going to hit that maximum potential, but that's a story for another day. In terms of the other names for secret targets, I don't know, with the club at times, sort of place that we could just randomly come with something out of thin air. I mean, like the Wharton story, I think this morning, that was something that, just confused me. I mentioned Lee Kang in because it feels like the sort of nonsense that we like to do. And, it feels like the sort of player that's available. I don't know, what's Antoine Griezmann doing these days? Does he fancy 12 months in England? I mean, that feels like the sort of absolute nonsense that we do. Well, that's very true. I mean, that feels like the sort of absolute nonsense. I don't know. There's inevitably, at some point I had this horrible, horrible vision earlier in the summer at some point that we would end up bidding for one of the Arsenal, like Fabio Vieira or someone like that from Arsenal, or Reece Nelson, just simply because they seem to buy players off us. So we end up, eventually we have to fulfill our side of the bargain. I'm 99.99% sure neither of them are this mystery name. I mean, let's face it, 99% of the time this is going to end up just being a Manchester City ex-youngster. So, you know what? F it, we're signing Oscar Bob. we get linked with him. We get linked with him at least twice a window.
We would do that if City would actually let him go.
Oh, I know we would. And that's the thing about it, isn't it? So you know what? Actually, the one they are willing to let go if they can get the right money for him. F it, we'll sign Savinho. Well, Tottenham took our target. We'll take their target.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I just think it's got to be that 10 role because there's no more room for wingers. I mean, you've got Esteval and Neto on the right. You've got Gittins and Garnacho on the left. You've got Palmer who can play right. I just think if we're going to sign someone, and I think it will be late, because my understanding is obviously with the UEFA sanctions, they need to sell on the A list to be able to bring in, and obviously Nkunku left, but that's the Garnacho money basically. So I think they're waiting for Jackson, and maybe that's the reason that they didn't do the Simons one. They weren't in a position. Simons got fed up and he moved on and went for Tottenham, and Chelsea weren't willing to make a risk for him, shall we say, and sign him and then sell later down the line. So I think the number 10 one will rumble on for the rest of the window and probably get towards the back end of the window. It's probably a Monday. Well, I mean, we love being in the media and we love being dramatic. So who says it's not a 10 p.m. 10:59 p.m. on Monday, just before the deadline, that we finally get whatever the target is in. So let's see. I'm sure there'll be lots of different twists and turns and links. Yep. So I think it will just go down to the wire on this. It will be a late one, and then we'll see what happens, see what sales we do, and see what we can bring in. The on outgoings specifically, Tyreek George is one that's been mentioned quite a lot in the media with Leipzig, with Roma, etc. What's your understanding of the situation, Rob?
So, from what I understand, the club actually would have ideally liked to loan Tyreek George out. However, he's done what he's been fully within his rights to do as a professional footballer, which is decide that he wants full control over his future and his destiny. Completely fair. And so has been exploring opportunities for a permanent move. The club, if it does happen, would ideally at least like a hefty sell-on clause. If not, they would like, some sort of buyback sort of option, I think. And again, I'm not sure they'll necessarily get a buyback into it, but I think they will at least get a sell-on, maybe matching rights. AS Roma are quite keen. They've wanted a winger all window. Their first target was Jadon Sancho. That hasn't happened so far, so they pivoted to George. RB Leipzig held interest in the player, but again, I don't think they wanted to pay what Chelsea are asking for. Chelsea want a package that looks northwards towards 20 sort of million, and then a sell-on, and then also options buyback or a matching clause. I think that, he will probably leave. I think AS Roma will be a really good move for him. Jean-Pierre Gasperini in charge there, who's very, very good at getting the most out of attackers. And at the end of the day, I feel like he probably, he deserves his decision and deserves his sort of, his chance to go out and play first-team football on a regular basis. And I hold no grudge against that. As I've said before, my view on how an academy operates is that it's not necessarily about how many players make it into your first team as an academy. It's how many of them go on and have professional football careers, because that's what the academy is designed to do. And whether they're playing, at the very top in the Champions League, or whether they're playing in, League Two, or, the second Bundesliga, or, the professional career in South Korea, then at least they're going and having a professional career, and that's what they should do rather than falling out the game completely.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think if my son grew up and was a professional footballer and had a chance to go to Cobham, I would absolutely be happy for him to do so, with either the view of becoming a Chelsea player, or if not, then he's going to get a fairly good move. I mean, you even look at like somebody like Alfie Gilchrist, who's just gone to West Brom. It's like, well, he's not Premier League, but it's still a high-level player and a high-level side, and has the ability to move on from there. So, yeah. I think that's fair. I think Roma's probably where I'd want to go if I was Tyreek George, because for the exact reason you said. I mean, Gasperini's renowned for getting the best out of players. Look at Lookman and what he did with him. So, we'll have to see where that goes. We'll see where he ends up. Obviously, more outgoings to go as well. Anything you've heard on Disasi specifically?
So, Axel Disasi, the club want him out on a permanent deal. The player himself is less keen, shall we say, on leaving permanently unless it's an option that really suits him. He ideally wanted Champions League football. There is, though there has been an offer at least on the table in the last week from Bournemouth, which was a loan fee and an option. The club aren't very keen on doing options on loans. They would ideally rather it be obligations. And consequently, there's interest from Sunderland, but again, I don't think at the fee Chelsea want to necessarily pay. And again, I think they're interested in slightly overstated. There's still interest from European teams. I do think he will get a move. I think that what is interesting is Chelsea, I think, will try and tie up that last loan spot fairly soon for the international loans, to make teams or players have to make a decision on what they do. And the likes of Disasi, Ben Chillwell, Raheem Sterling, David Fofana decide, to sort of put up or shut up in regards to if they, stay or whether they go somewhere domestically.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. if it like I personally see that last loan spot being like Jackson to Bayern Munich with an obligation if that's what they can agree, and then everybody else has to either go permanently or a domestic loan. On Jackson specifically, anything you've heard outside of Bayern Munich, or what's the latest you've heard on that?
I mean, Bayern are probably the most keen at the moment, and probably the one who, like, crucially have an agreement with the player. There are other clubs that hold interest in him, but none of them so far have solidified it into a proper offer. Aston Villa, for example, they really like him, but they're tight on their own financial situation. Newcastle, he was way down the pecking order, and with Nick Voltemada joining, and also, interested in Johan Wissa, I think that opportunity probably disappears. If other strikers if Liverpool don't get Alexander Isak, it's possible they could turn to him. Richard Hughes is a big fan, but again, I think Chelsea would want a permanent move. It's sort of a difficult one because I think Chelsea aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily looking to sell Nicholas Jackson for, say, the cheap or for anything like that, but they're not really looking to sort of do anything on the sort of expensive. So,
yeah, I think with Jackson, we've kind of in a way forced him out, so we might have to be at least reasonable with the fee. You probably can't ask for the 80 million that's been banded around in the media, but then also you're not going to go and sell him for 45, 50. So I think something around that 60 million mark is probably fair. On outgoings, any other outgoings you want to mention? Obviously, we've got, like you said, Chillwell, Sterling, etc., that all need to go. Any other things you've heard that are progressing?
I mean, Sterling has rejected a lot of offers because he wants to stay in London. And like privately, someone suggested to me he'd be quite happy just to sit on his wage. He feels that the relationship between him and Chelsea, ideally, if he leaves, I think if Chelsea were offering to pay him off, he'd probably take it. But I don't think they're going to. Chillwell, again, training well, but the wages make it difficult for a lot of teams. It's the sort of thing I could see, someone coming in for a domestic loan next week and probably trying to do something late on in the window. I think it's going to have to be a loan deal. David Fofana, there's some interest from Turkey and some interest from Portugal, but again, nothing really solidifying, and his injury record hasn't really, infused clubs, shall we say. Besides that, Alex Matos, I think, is going to finally get his move, whether it's a loan or a permanent. He's talking to Sheffield United and also other clubs in the Championship. We've mentioned Alfie Gilchrist. Sam Raksaki, I think, could leave on a permanent deal. Coventry have had historic interest there, and they might look to him again. If Keanu Dyer does sign his new deal before the close of the window, I suspect he goes on loan somewhere. I suspect that's part of the caveat of it. And then there is still interest from Strasbourg in Genesis Antwi, but I don't necessarily know if that's going to get done this window or indeed, if Chelsea are going to sort of try and keep him, because they would rather, there's interest in other clubs to try and take him on loan, and I think Chelsea might rather loan him out. Obviously, because he's under age and is homegrown, under 21 and homegrown, he does qualify for the, outside the loan limits, so they can be a bit more sort of selective in that regard.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's going to be interesting. I mean, they're going to be very busy. It's a good job we've got 15 sporting directors and 35 people in recruitment, so they can all deal with all the different outgoings, and hopefully we'll finally be able to make the bomb squad a little bit smaller, because we've seemed to have just had a rolling 7 or 8 players that are just in the bomb squad.
I will say in that regard, I do think, and I know there's plenty of things you can criticise the directors for this window, but I do think they have done quite a good job in getting a lot of those players out of the club, and indeed getting them out on permanent deals, because ultimately it did eventually need to happen. And when you look at like Manchester United, for example, with their own, bomb squad, as per se, and the fact that they can't really even move any of them out on permanent deals, it is sort of, it is definitely quite problematic.
No, I agree. I think they've done well in selling. It's probably the thing that they've done the best so far this window, outside of probably strikers, to be honest, in Pedro and Delap. So yeah, they've done well. The problem is the bomb squad is made up of players that, outside of Sterling and Chilwell, they've all bought in the last 2 years and now don't want anymore. So yeah, hopefully we can just get them out, but they have done a very good job of selling, and yeah, they've done a much better job than Arsenal, United, Newcastle, Villa, etc. They've managed to get a lot of people out the door, so they have done well in that regard. Luke, I think you were going to bring up a few of the questions from the tweets that we put out earlier. So do you want to?
Yeah,
Go
so
over that.
yeah, we put out a tweet this afternoon, letting everyone know that we had Rob coming on the show, and a few people have come back with various questions, Rob. So we'll keep it a little bit quick fire if we can. So the first one I've got: any info on incomings for the women's side? It's been very quiet lately.
I mean, the Chelsea women's priority this window was to sign a versatile forward, which they've done in Mara Albert, and to get right back cover in Ellie Carpenter, and also an option, longer term option ahead of Lucy Bronze. Otherwise, they feel they've got quite a strong squad. The return of Lexi Potter as well in the midfield has further bolstered it. Obviously, Sam Kerr being back to fitness is, something that the club are very excited about and are quite keen. They do hope she's going to come in and hit the ground running again. I think if the right name came up at the right fee, they would still be willing to do business. But certainly, the conversations that Sonia Montpastor has had with journalists and things suggest it would have to be a really exceptional opportunity.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Staying on the women, we've been asked a question, and I won't pretend to know anything about this, but can we get an update about building a proper women's building at Cobham? I gather it's very hard to get permission in Surrey, but has there been any attempts made or architects on site at all?
I will be completely honest. I don't know. I know there was conversations about this, and I know it's been quite sort of firmly pushed following the investment, but I don't know anything further on that at this moment in time. I know it's certainly been on the list of things, along with updates to Kings Meadow, etc. But I don't know, anything in the particulars.
Okay, and then we've got this is sort of two questions rolled into one, really. Can we expect another signing this window? I'm assuming they mean outside of Garnacho. And
Yes.
have you got any guesses on the surprise name?
Well, I mean,
obviously we've discussed that during this pod anyway.
I mean, we now know. I mean, it's interesting because as someone points out to me, Buonanotte is under 21 again, so it doesn't actually need to be Prem registered. So it's whether they intend to bring someone else into the equation. I mean, that to me would feel like bloating the squad. But at the end of the day, I suppose if they can get the right name in, I honestly I wouldn't like to predict. That Chelsea are impossible to know what happens these days in windows, and it's also a case with the club nowadays is they'll say they aren't doing something and then 24 hours later do it. So, I sort of it's impossible to predict them nowadays.
So, and just to reiterate, can we expect another signing this window outside of Garnacho?
Well, yeah, I think we can safely assume someone else is going to come in.
Yep.
Who it is that comes in is up in the air.
Exactly. Okay, and then you've just given an update on Sterling and Chillwell. So I think we've covered all of the questions really, as you would expect. There's been a lot of talk about Xavi Simons, etc. So yeah, I think that's it for all of the questions on X.
Perfect. Well, Rob, I'll give you a moment to plug anything you want to talk about, or anything that you're doing at the moment, or where people can find you before we wrap up.
Yeah, so the final couple of things, I suppose, important thing to mention that obviously great to see us get the award yesterday at the UEFA draw for winning it all, being the first club to do that. I don't think anyone will do that anytime soon. Great to see actually the UEFA Youth League acknowledged on there because people forget we were the first team to win that back-to-back as well, as part of the golden generation in Cobham in the last decade or so. Secondly, if you haven't got your tickets for next Friday and you are planning on attending the Chelsea women's game, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and do it. It's going to be a great opening game against Manchester City under the lights at Stamford Bridge. City have a very strong squad this year. Chelsea have a very strong squad. It's a real clash of the Titans. The games between the two sides tend to be very, very good matches. Even if Chelsea don't win, they do tend to be, high-scoring affairs. There tends to be a lot of quality on show. And also it's a chance to see a lot of, the victorious Summer Lionesses. So that's always great. And finally, if you want to follow me and you don't already, it's at journalism_RP on X. I'm also working on a couple of other little projects at this moment in time, but, more details on them soon.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time, Rob. It was good to chat about that. Thank you for everybody for listening. Pop your comments down below to give us your thoughts on anything we've discussed or anything you think Chelsea should be doing, and we will catch you all again soon. Cheers.